Welcome to my Nuzlocking guide for Wattson, the notorious third gym leader of Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. This guide will include the following: a review of Wattson's team, including the Pokemon, their tendencies, and some general strategies to keep in mind, how to construct your team, and some general tips and tricks. I'll be going over his Emerald team the most, as that is the team that will give you the most problems, and generally speaking, everything I say about the Emerald fight can essentially apply to the Ruby and Sapphire fight as well, minus the Manectric, of course. Feel free to use the timestamps to skip to whatever you're interested in the most, and with that being said, sit back, relax, and let's get into the guide. Let's talk about Wattson's team. First of all, what is it about this fight that makes it notorious? What is so goddamn scary about this squad? Well, a couple of things. Let's start with this Voltorb. Rollout, whatever. Spark, okay. Shockwave, who cares? But then there's self-destruct. And let me tell you, in my experience, Wattson is not shy about blowing this little guy up right from the beginning of the battle. Self-destructing this early in the game just deals too much damage. It will basically kill anything that's not really tanky or that doesn't resist it. At least his ability doesn't really have any impact on the fight for the most part, but it's still just a nuisance. And speaking of nuisances, Electrike may be the weakest Pokemon on this team, but his static ability is absolutely obnoxious, and it feels like it hits every single time, I swear. There's not much else to say though. Electrike is very frail, and this one will very rarely use Shockwave, and really loves spamming either Howl or Quick Attack, so not too bad there. But now we get to his Magneton, which really just feels unfair that Wattson has one so early on in the game. The scariest part about Magneton, other than his insanely high special attack stat, is his Steel typing. Steel is normally a very rare type to find this early in any Pokemon game, and there's a reason for that. Steel just resists too many types in the game, and it makes it very, very difficult to take this Magneton down. His ability can be ignored because it doesn't do anything, but his moveset cannot. No matter what button Wattson presses for this Magneton, you're going to have a bad time. But don't worry, we do have some strategies to get through this thing later in the video. It's worth noting that in Ruby and Sapphire, Wattson also has a Magnemite, which can basically be treated as a mini Magneton, where similar strategies will apply. Definitely not as intimidating though. And finally, we have Wattson's ace in Manectric. Fast, hits hard if it wants to, and sporting a Citrus Berry for a ton of extra healing that can be difficult to overcome, especially after just dealing with his Magneton. Static is again present and annoying as all hell, and that's really all there is to it. Now let's go over some general but very important things to keep in mind for this fight, as well as go over some top level strategies for each of his Pokemon. So first off, the order in which Wattson sends out his Pokemon is very consistent. Regardless of how your team is constructed, Wattson will almost always go with Voltorb first, obviously, but then he'll always go Electrike, then Magneton, and then Manectric. So plan around this ordering. Give every Pokemon in your party a Cherry Berry to hold to remove paralysis. Unless, of course, the Pokemon that you're using is immune to electric types. In that case, an Oran Berry will be just fine. For his Voltorb, you are going to want to lead with a Pokemon that can take that self-destruct, because unless you kill this Voltorb in one hit, there's a very good chance that he will use it. In my experience, it basically feels like a 50-50 chance, so be prepared. He will rarely use Rollout, and if he does hit you with something else, it will most likely be Spark. Electrike is very easy to take down, generally speaking. He can be fairly Howl happy at times, which definitely leaves the door open for you to take him out quickly without taking too much damage in return. If you can help it, taking him out with a non-contact move is obviously the best case as well, so you can avoid getting paralyzed by static. But only take this approach if you can still take Electrike out quickly. Magneton, generally speaking, is the most difficult part of this fight. It will rarely use Shockwave, even sometimes when it seems like it would kill the Pokemon, which I have found very interesting in my attempts against him. Magneton will usually lead with Thunder Wave, very, very often, as long as your Pokemon is not paralyzed already. This usually makes it fairly safe to switch into if you have a specific Pokemon in mind to take him down, and assuming that Pokemon you switch in is holding a Cherry Berry as well. Otherwise, Sonic Boom is probably its favorite move, but it will sprinkle in Supersonic here and there. If you don't have any of the best encounters that I'll mention in just a minute, putting him to sleep or paralyzing him with Stun Spore or something like that will definitely be your best option. If Electrike is how happy, then Manectric is how obsessed. If you send out a Pokemon that resists electric type attacks, this Manectric has a tendency to spam Howl 3 or 4 times before quick attacking your team to death. This is simultaneously a good and a terrifying experience. Just make sure you can hit Manectric hard enough to keep up the pressure and not let him get out of control. Also, don't forget that the Citrus Berry he's holding is a problem, and sometimes we forget to account for that. The extra healing makes a massive difference this early on in the game. Okay, alright, I think that covers everything regarding Wattson's team. Now let's go over what we can do on our side. So for this segment, I'm going to go over the best possible encounters you can run into before this fight, why they are good, and how to use them, etc. And then we can go over some of the alternatives if you run into some bad luck. Let's start off by going over the encounters that will completely trivialize this fight and essentially make Wattson free. And it just so happens that one of them is a guaranteed encounter. Mudkip and Geodude are the absolute best Pokemon to deal with Wattson. Both having the ground typing is of course their biggest strength offensively and defensively. Geodude comes packed with Magnitude, while Marshtomp is sporting Mudshot. Both moves will completely decimate Wattson's team, and that is exactly how you'll be using both of these guys. Just throw an Aura Berry on them and spam until the third badge is yours. Very quick note before moving on, Shedinja can also be put into this category if he is not banned in your runs. I think the only move that Wattson can use that will work against him is Rollout on his Voltorb, so I just personally ban Shedinja for my runs because I just think Wonder Guard is too powerful in ability. If you did not pick Mudkip as your starter, or were not lucky enough to get a Geodude, you'll definitely need some help. As far as the remaining 2 starters are concerned, Combuskin will definitely perform a little bit better than Grovyle in my opinion, which might sound weird because while Fighting and Fire are decent against Magneton, Grovyle's grass typing does give it the edge defensively against Wattson's entire team. But let me tell you something, Grovyle's offensive capabilities are just awful. In fact, they're basically non-existent. His moveset is so bad that you'll honestly want to use Cut over anything else that you can get up to that point. Although I suppose you could take your chance with Bullet Seed, but man, that just feels really bad. With that being said, Grovyle is still helpful against Wattson, just not as helpful as Combuskin. I personally like using him against Wattson's first 2 Pokemon in Voltorb and Electrike, because honestly he's just not going to be good enough to stand toe-to-toe against either Magneton or Manectric. So having him go in there and take the Self-Destruct, Paralysis, and any other small annoyances so the rest of your team can be healthy for Wattson's big guns is pretty good. As for Combuskin, depending on what encounters you received, you could go the exact same route and just use him to take out Voltorb and Electrike. Or you could have him try and take out Magneton, which Combuskin is definitely capable of doing considering Magneton's tendencies. Ideally, you want to switch Combuskin in when Magneton tries to go for a Thunder Wave, which is likely as long as your current Pokemon isn't already paralyzed. Just make sure your Combuskin is holding a Cherry Berry to remove the paralysis. Magneton also rarely goes for Shockwave in my experience, so switching into a Sonic Boom shouldn't be too bad either. Yes, Magneton will be faster, but he will go for Thunder Wave most likely a second time, giving you an opportunity to hit it before it gets in any damage. You will have to get lucky with avoiding paralysis, which is why Combuskin isn't the most optimal Pokemon to take on Magneton, but it can be done. If you do manage to avoid paralysis on your attacking turns, Combuskin should have no problem two-shotting that Magneton. I would not advise using Combuskin against Manectric if you can help it though, because your strongest move in Double Kick basically makes it twice as likely for you to get paralyzed, just making everything more difficult. Now that we've gone over the remaining starters and how they perform, let's talk about the best Pokemon to support them in this fight out of the possible encounters you could receive. Your next best encounters for Wattson are going to be Shroomish in Petalburg Woods and Makuhita in Granite Cave. That's now 2 potential encounters in Granite Cave that will be very helpful for you. Both Pokemon are going to make Wattson's Magneton much easier, if not free. The only thing that can really go wrong is if Magneton pulls off a Supersonic Thunder Wave combo, which is gonna be tough for it to do considering Supersonic has a 55% accuracy, and it will also have to use Thunder Wave twice, assuming that you've equipped a Cherry Berry to either Breloom or Hariyama. Let's talk about Breloom first. Look at this goddamn attack stat. It should be illegal to have this much power this obvious early in the game. Breloom gets Headbutt and Mach Punch as its two primary attacks against Wattson, the latter being what you should use against his Magneton. Despite Mach Punch's low base power of 40, because of that enormous attack stat, Breloom will always kill that Magneton in 2 hits. In many cases, depending on EVs, IVs, and nature, Breloom will actually knock Magneton down to about 25% of its HP with just one Mach Punch. This scenario is even better because Wattson will want to blow all of his potions on his Magneton, giving you a free Magneton kill while also removing all of Wattson's healing. Magneton doesn't have the static ability like the others, so you won't have to worry about getting paralyzed during this process. And after Magneton goes down, Breloom can stand toe-to-toe with Manectric as well most of the time, because Manectric won't use Shockwave due to Breloom's resistance. Don't get me wrong, you can still get screwed over with quick attack crits and paralysis, of course. You could also Leech Seed the Manectric as well if you had already taken damage from Magneton, which will give you a nice edge as well. Similarly with Breloom, Hariyama is sporting a fat attack stat, but it is also quite bulkier than Breloom with a ridiculous HP stat as well. It is worth noting that Breloom has the grass typing for electric resistance, but honestly both are very close defensively against Wattson. Hariyama is going to have a very similar offensive strategy as well, although Vital Throw has considerably more base power than Mach Punch, and in some cases may even one-shot the Magneton and two-shot Manectric. If you can sneak in a bulk up somewhere else in the battle, then both of those scenarios will come true for sure. Oh, and he just happens to get Fake Out for a little extra damage as well, although that might be a little bit riskier to use with the presence of static. Both Breloom and Hariyama will make your life so much easier if Mudkip wasn't your starter selection. Just be sure to give them both cherry berries like everyone else on your team. If you have any of these Pokemon on your team before Wattson, that includes Marshtomp, Geodude, Breloom, or Hariyama, Wattson will give you little to no issue at all. Now let's go over some alternatives for when you are not lucky enough to grab one of these encounters. If you do not ban Alakazam in your runs, then obviously he's going to be really strong, even without resistances and super effective attacks. The stats are just too huge. Your next best encounters are going to be the ones with higher stats, such as Mightyena, Linoone, Vigoroth, Kadabra, and especially Gloom for that extra resistance and utility. Mightyena has Intimidate, which does help a little bit, especially when Manectric and Electrike like to go for a bunch of howls before quick attacking you to death. It does have Bite for potential flinches, and you can get the black glasses from the other side of Whismur Cave to boost that bite as well, but you probably just want to stick with the Cherry Berry, honestly. Linoone has Stab Headbutt, and that's about it for the most part. But that's a lot of damage right there, honestly, and since he does evolve early, his defensive stats are a little bit bulkier for this part of the game. Vigoroth will have Uproar and Fury Swipes, which are not very useful, but his utility options are amazing. Yawn, Encore, and Slack Off to heal himself if you need to. Yawn is particularly helpful against taking down that Magneton, of course. The biggest thing that these three have in common is that they can all use Rock Smash, which can be helpful for Magneton if you don't have any other options. Kadabra just has great base stats and Psybeam. Psybeam will hit really hard, and so this makes Kadabra more of a brute force option for Electrike and maybe even Manectric. Gloom is next, and utility plus resistance is the name of the game here. Stun Spore and Sleep Powder is what you're looking to do against Wattson's team, really just to be as annoying as humanly possible. Both moves are really aimed at aiding in the downfall of Magneton, but getting one of them off against Manectric is also super helpful as well. And those are the best alternatives, I would say, if you were not able to attain any of the fighting or ground types. What makes Wattson so much more difficult without those encounters is that Magneton becomes exponentially more difficult to deal with. If you have to use any of these alternatives, the strategy is definitely going to be to put Magneton to sleep or paralyze him with Stun Spore, using Rock Smash to basically take him out slowly from there. You could also use that time to try and set up as well with moves like Howl on Mightyena, or you could teach Bulk Up to Vigoroth as well as an example. Or maybe Sableye was your encounter for Granite Cave, and in that case you could use Nightshade to take down the Magneton as well, with the help of Sleep or Paralysis of course. These alternative Pokemon are especially important if you chose Grovyle as your starter, as you will not get any help from him offensively, apart from taking out Voltorb and maybe Electrike. Finally, to wrap up the construction of our team, I want to briefly talk about some Pokemon that seem like they could be really good for Wattson, but I feel like might be a bit overrated in my experience. Nuzleaf may have okayish stats and does have the grass typing for resistance, but there's not much you're going to do offensively, and his defensive stats are just too low. So low to the point that the resistance may not even matter that much. Your options offensively are maybe Thief and Bullet Seed. He does have Fake Out too, but like I mentioned earlier, it's much riskier on the Pokemon that you would want to use it on due to static. You can use Bide, I suppose, against Magneton, which might work out great or horribly depending on what Magneton hits you with. It's a very risky play. Overall, if you have Nuzleaf, I think he's still worth bringing to the fight, just don't expect him to take anything out without help. Nincada is a ground type with a very high defensive stat, which sounds awesome on the surface against Wattson's entire team. But offensively, this thing has nothing, not even Mud Slap. It can't learn Rock Smash either, so it's literally useless against Magneton. And really, your only option is Fury Swipes, which is terrible, so. Dustox is also unfortunately not that great for this fight either due to his offenses. Magneton resists everything that Dustox has, and Dustox doesn't have any utility outside of proccing the extra effect off of Confusion, which would require a bit too much luck. Gulpin and Kirlia are just too frail and weak in general, and while Plusle, Minun, Illumise, and Volbeat have some decent utility, their offensive options are basically non-existent as well for the most part. Plusle and Minun do get Fake Tears and Charm though, which can be useful. You can still bring all these guys along, it just makes the overall strategy you're trying to pull off a little bit more complicated. Encore shouldn't be overlooked necessarily, as it can lock his Pokemon into doing things that are not optimal, but it's just a little risky and inconsistent. And that about wraps up the team building options that you have. For a quick recap, these Pokemon will make Wattson bend the knee. These will make life significantly easier for you. These are your best alternatives. And these last ones are a bit overrated in my opinion, but still worth bringing along. You'll just need to think a bit harder on how to incorporate them into your overall strategy. Finally, before I end the video, I just want to go over a list of some extra bonus tips and strategies that you can use to maximize your chance of success. Using the move Thief on Manectric Citrus Berry can make a big difference. If you somehow have the money to purchase Flamethrower from the Game Corner, do it, as long as you have the Pokemon that can learn it. I'm not actually sure if this is possible or not to obtain though, so correct me if I'm wrong here. It is worth mentioning that Sand Attack strats are not very helpful in Wattson, which is why I haven't mentioned it until now. All of his Pokemon know Shockwave, which cannot miss. The move Attract can also be very helpful, whether it is to cripple his Manectric, or you can even use it on his Electrike so you can give yourself time to set up with Howl or Bulk Up. This is a pretty decent strat if you chose Trico as your starter and weren't able to get any of the fighting or ground types. And I've already said it a few times now, but it is worth repeating again and again. Make sure your Pokemon are equipped with Cherry Berries. All of them, unless it's your Marshtomp or Geodude. There is not a single held item in the game that you get up to this point that will be more useful than a Cherry Berry. And with that, this video is now over. I hope you found this guide to Wattson helpful, and let me know if you have any personal strategies to add that worked for you. Also, let me know if you like the format of the video and if you'd like to see this done for the other gym leaders as well. As always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments what other kinds of content you'd like to see me do in the future. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.